The game just did the one thing everybody swore he couldn't do anymore. He put Drake on a record, aimed it straight at the West Coast's loudest gatekeepers, and used one simple hook, no breaks, to basically tell the whole culture, I'm not stopping for your feelings. And the wild part is, this isn't even really about a rap beef bar for bar. It's about who gets to stamp approved on Compton, who gets to rewrite history in real time, and who profits off the chaos when fans start picking sides like it's a gang draft. Because if you listen to what the game is actually signaling on this new track, the pick a side line, the red mood, the way Drake only shows up like a ghost on the hook, it feels less like a normal feature and more like a strategic dare. Like the game is saying, you wanted a line in the sand? Cool, I'm drawing it. Now walk up. And here's where it gets nasty. The loudest voices pushing the you can't rock with him out here narrative, they're not even always artists. It's the timeline hall monitors, the pick-a-side patrol, the same people who live off turning rap into a 24/7 courtroom. But suddenly, they're shocked when an actual rapper treats it like war. And later, when we get to that phone call clip where Wack jumps in with Ack right after the record premieres, there's one little phrase in there that tells you the real reason this song dropped when it did, and why somebody behind the scenes clearly wanted a few people to shut up before this got bigger than music. Because if you miss that part, you're going to misunderstand the whole move and why it ends with somebody looking real small, even if they never respond on Wax. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. So let's set the table the right way, because this story is already getting warped by the same folks who warp everything. The headline is simple. A new record drops tied to the game's upcoming album rollout, and it features Drake. But the conversation isn't how does the song sound, it's who is this aimed at, and more importantly, who is it aimed through? Because the game has history with this exact kind of moment. He's always been the guy who will stand in the doorway and dare you to make it move, not with vague subtweets, with actual actions that force everybody else to show their hand. And Drake, for his part, has been in that same mode for years. Show up in unexpected places, make people argue about it, let the arguing do half the promo, and keep it pushing. Whether you love him or hate him, you can't pretend you don't understand the pattern. The no breaks hook isn't just a catchy chant, it's the philosophy. Don't pause for the think pieces. Don't slow down for the purity tests. Don't stop because the pick-a-side patrol is blowing whistles like this is recess. Now layer in the West Coast politics angle that keeps hovering over this. There's been talk for a long time, reportedly from people around different camps, that Kendrick Lamar didn't love the game bringing Drake to Compton for the 100 video years back. That's not new gossip, it's part of the lore. And fast forward to now, after a year where rap fans turned every feature into a referendum and every city into a scoreboard, you've got people acting like friendships are treaties and collaborations are invasions. So the stakes aren't small. Musically, a Drake feature is a big lever, period. Culturally, putting Drake next to Compton again hits a nerve because it challenges who thinks they own the narrative. Financially, controversy is currency. A track like this doesn't just stream, it spreads. And reputationally, this is the game reasserting, I'm not little bro to anybody, including your favorite Pulitzer poster boy. Does everybody understand how crazy that is to do in public, on a record, while everyone's already tense? And if this is just a statement, like some people are calling it, then what exactly is the statement, and who is it really meant to pressure? All right, let's get into the surface evidence first, the stuff you can actually point to without guessing. First piece is the record itself, and specifically how it opens and frames its energy. The competitor clip you brought shows the reaction to those early bars where the game is basically setting tone with subliminals and mood setting. That red line isn't just some random aesthetic. In a hip-hop context, red is loaded. It's blood. It's danger. It's we're not in a polite mood. It's also the whole viral world of red and rap right now with certain affiliations and imagery. The point is, he's telling you up front, I'm on timing. And he's doing it while snucking Drake in this, like the commentator says, which is already a little troll, because Drake doesn't even have to rap the diss for it to feel like a diss.
His presence is the provocation. And notice the structure. Drake on the hook, the game handling the talk. That's important. That's not Drake crashes the party and takes over the record. That's the game saying, you wanted to accuse me of bringing him around? I'm doubling down. And he doesn't even need to do much. His name alone makes you spiral. Why would you give your enemy the satisfaction of a full Drake verse when the hook is enough to make the pick-a-side patrol start writing citations? Second surface piece is that line that's getting quoted everywhere because it's the bluntest part of the whole thing. They told me pick a side, then I'm picking homicide. Now, for monetization safety and basic reality, we're not treating that as a literal instruction. It's rapper talk, it's violent imagery, it's aggression as a metaphor. But as a message, it's crystal. He's rejecting the premise. He's mocking the premise. He's saying, if you force me to choose, I'm not choosing your team. I'm choosing escalation. And whether you like the game's theatrics or not, you can't act like that bar
doesn't tell you exactly who he's addressing. Not one person, but a whole crowd that's been trying to corner him into a loyalty test. And that's where Drake's hook becomes the third surface piece. No breaks, no breaks, no breaks. Because the hook functions like a chant over a fight video. The commentator even ties it directly to that idea. There were people talking crazy, and then they had to hit the brakes. But the record is literally saying, no brakes. It's petty, it's simple, it's almost childish, which is why it's effective. In the attention economy, the simplest slogans win. If the timeline hall monitors have been trying to slow this down and make it proper, the hook is the opposite of proper. It's a loop, a taunt, something you can spam under posts. Now, fourth surface piece is where this stops being just lyrics interpretation and becomes receipts. In the competitor transcript, there's a clip pulled from a podcaster/DJ figure, Mac Wop, talking about an incident that allegedly happened involving the games team and a fade, and he claims he had footage and somebody tried to buy it. Whether you believe it or not is almost secondary. What matters is that this wasn't just random fan talk. It was a public claim made on mic with street credibility implications attached. And the game's response, shown in the transcript, is a comment that reads like a direct challenge. Ask Bishop to say this. That's surface evidence of the game refusing to let a narrative sit. He's not letting bloggers play telephone with his name. He's trying to drag it into the light and force specifics. And then the fifth surface piece is the breaks moment itself. Because Mac Wop later says he got a call and the higher-ups told him to shut it up. That is a wild sentence in any context. Higher-ups is not my homie told me chill. Higher-ups sounds like structure. It sounds like somebody with leverage. It sounds like the kind of behind-the-scenes pressure that fans never see, but it shapes what gets said publicly. So when you put that right next to a record chanting no breaks, what do you think the subtext is? It's the game basically daring the entire ecosystem. Call whoever you want, I'm still talking. And just when you think that's the story, you get the public conversation between DJ Academics and 100 right after the premiere. Ac asks for clarification, Wack frames it like a statement, and then he goes into that whole vibe of some people follow the leader, some people are the leader, and that the game is a wolf who will do what he does. Again, surface evidence of how the people around the game want this framed, not as an accidental controversy, as a deliberate stance. So on the surface, you've got a track with Drake's hook, the game throwing pick-a-side energy, a public back and forth with a media figure who claims higher-ups made him stop, and a manager hopping on the phone right after to shape the narrative. If that's the surface, you already know the cultural layer is where it starts getting messy. Because the West Coast Border Patrol does not like being challenged in public, and oh, do I have more for you. Because now we get to the part where the timeline hall monitors pretend they're just asking questions, but really they're trying to decide who gets exiled. And if you're one of the Drake stans who thinks this is just a cute feature, I need you to stay locked. Because in the next stretch, we're going to talk about that higher-ups phone call energy, why certain people suddenly got quiet, and why the game choosing to plant Drake on the hook instead of giving him a full diss verse might be the slickest part of the whole play. And to the pick-a-side patrol already warming up their keyboards like they're about to hand out citizenship papers to Compton, please do. I want you loud in the comments for this part, because your logic is about to fold in 4K. Now, let's talk cultural evidence, the stuff that isn't just what was said, but how the community moved once it was said. First cultural signal is the immediate framing from media personalities around the record. In the transcript, the commentator opens by clowning academics, the non-DJ, the non-hip-hop media member, the non-journalist, but still acknowledges his platform power, even claiming it broke another record on Act's page. Whether the record claim is exact or not, the point stands. The culture's loudest distribution points are often not the culture's most credible historians. That matters because when a song like this drops, the first wave of interpretation is shaped by the same megaphones that profit from confusion. The algorithm mayor doesn't need to be right, he just needs to be first. And if you're the game, you know that. So dropping this through that ecosystem is not an accident, it's using the system. Second cultural piece is the Mac WAP situation itself, because it shows how quickly street talk turns into content and then turns into, oh wait, I got a call. He's on mic saying there was footage, saying somebody tried to buy it, saying Top Dog was involved, big names being casually tossed into a story. That kind of talk spreads because it's got everything: alleged violence, alleged money, alleged embarrassment. It's perfect grift fuel. Then the game publicly calls cap. Then Mac WAP later says higher-ups told him to shut up. That arc, escalate, tease receipts, then suddenly clamp down, is exactly how rumors get engineered into truth on the internet. You don't even need the footage, you just need the suggestion that footage exists. And I want to be clear here, there's a counter-argument that some people will make that's not totally crazy. They'll say maybe he got told to shut up because it was getting too hot and it was for safety, not politics. Fine, that's possible. But even if that's the case, what does that still prove? It proves that when certain names get involved, people do not speak freely, which means the public narrative you're consuming is filtered, which means the pick-a-side patrol yelling it's obvious who's right is often just yelling based on the version they were allowed to hear.
Third cultural piece is Whack 100's role as a narrative bender. In the clip, he jumps on with Ack and plays that classic, "I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, that one?" routine. That's not confusion, that's performance. Whack's whole brand is being half in the street, half in the camera, always implying there's more he could say. And he uses that to keep attention on his client. When he calls it a statement and he compares the game to a leader and a wolf, he's not just complimenting him, he's warning the audience. Don't expect him to apologize. And then Ack does the most Ack thing possible. He asks if he can come to Compton like it's a field trip. That's not just comedy, that's a cultural tell. It shows how the internet turns real places into content backdrops. Compton becomes a prop, a flex location, a thumbnail. And that right there is why the West Coast Border Patrol gets so touchy, because they feel their real geography gets turned into somebody else's rollout. But here's the twist. The game is from there. So when outsiders try to police how he collaborates, it's not really protecting Compton, it's protecting hierarchy. Fourth cultural piece is the Kendrick shadow over all of this. The transcript explicitly says it's been reported that people close to Kendrick were upset about Drake being brought to Compton for the A100 video, and that the relationship was strained. Whether every detail is perfect or not, the idea has been circulating for years. Kendrick as the top dog, the game as the wild card, Drake as the lightning rod. So when the game does a Drake feature now, fans don't just hear a song, they hear a referendum on that hierarchy. And look at how the commentator frames the competitive angle. He brings up Joey Badass calling people out, people responding, and then asks why the Kendrick camp didn't respond in particular. That's cultural pressure. That's fans using sport logic on artistry. If this is competition, why not give them the show? And that's exactly the trap. The culture will call you the greatest, but then demand you prove it on command. That's how legends get dragged into petty timelines. And that's why a move like the game's is so provocative. It's baiting that dynamic without directly naming the king. Fifth cultural piece is the idea that this might not be the only record. The transcript mentions the game being in Toronto around the Iceman era, and hints there could be more music in the vault. That's not confirmation, that's speculation, but it's the kind of speculation that spreads because it feels plausible. Drake is known for stacking collabs. The game is known for doing big feature, big concept moves. So even the suggestion of more changes how people react to this single track. It turns a single track into a possible series, and now every camp is listening like, wait, is there another shoe? And the last cultural signal is the simplest, the online reaction pattern. You don't need to quote specific tweets to see it. Two sides instantly form. One side is yelling, he's standing on business, nobody can tell him who to work with. And the other side is yelling, he's clout chasing, he's trolling, he's disrespecting West Coast unity. And hovering above both sides are the timeline hall monitors, pretending they're neutral while they decide who gets to be from somewhere based on who they collaborated with. Mid-script word count check. Approximately 2,300 words so far. We're on pace for the 19 to 22-minute window without bloating. Now here comes the gear shift, because if you stay at the who should respond level, you miss the real story. This is where we pattern interrupt and we talk about the machine. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of what you're watching play out isn't pure rap beef. It's manufactured attention economics, engineered through platforms, and then laundered back into culture like it was organic. That's not me saying artists have no agency. They do. The game absolutely chose this. Drake absolutely chose this. But the way it spreads, the way it's framed, the way it becomes mandatory discourse, that's the system. System angle 1 is rollout strategy and feature economics. A Drake feature is not just a look, it's distribution, it's algorithmic lift, it's playlist gravity, it's reaction content bait. If the game has an album coming, a moment like this is a lever that makes the market pay attention. It also creates a narrative tunnel. Instead of people asking, what's the game's concept this album? They're asking, is he dissing Kendrick? Is Drake poking the West Coast again? Is somebody about to crash out? That keeps the conversation emotional, and emotional conversation converts better than rational conversation. Streams don't come from calm. Streams come from conflict. And pay attention to the way Drake is used. Hook only. Chanting, minimal risk. That's smart business. If Drake delivered a full verse with direct disses, now you've created an obligation for a direct response, and you've also created liabilities. But a hook that can be read as a vibe, a taunt, or a slogan, that lets Drake be present without being pinned down. It's deniable. And deniable presence is the most powerful presence in media. Drake gets the benefit of the chaos without taking the full heat of an explicit declaration. Meanwhile, the game gets to be the spear, the one saying it, which fits his brand anyway. System angle 2 is gatekeeping as brand protection. The West Coast Border Patrol isn't just fans being fans. It's a whole ecosystem of reputations, regional identity, and legacy narratives. Who gets called the West Coast King affects touring narratives, festival positioning, cosign politics, even how younger artists align themselves. And when a narrative hardens, the Kendrick is the top dog, Drake is the outsider, the game is the messy uncle narrative, people start treating it like law. But it's not law, it's propaganda through repetition.
So when the game dares that narrative by standing next to Drake publicly, he's not just trolling Kendrick fans, he's challenging the idea that one camp can freeze relationships and decide what's allowed. And the reason the pick-a-side patrol panics is because if the game can do that and nothing happens, then the gatekeeping loses power. Their whole "we decide" act gets exposed as a grift. Now, let's connect that higher-ups line to the system. When a media figure says higher-ups told me to shut it up, that's basically an accidental confession about how information is managed. It suggests there are people with influence who can pressure the conversation to cool down. Who are those higher-ups? Could be label relationships, could be street relationships, could be platform relationships, could be simply people with clout. But whichever one it is, the conclusion is the same. There's a layer above the fans where narratives get nudged. And this is where academics matters as a symbol, not a person. The algorithm mayor doesn't have to be from the culture to shape the culture's discourse, because the platform rewards the fastest amplifier. That's why the commentator clowning him while also using him is so revealing. Everybody complains about the megaphone, but everybody still speaks into it because it's where the attention is. That is the trap of modern hip-hop media. The gatekeepers pretend they're protecting the culture, while the platform gatekeepers are actually protecting engagement. Now zoom out one more step. Label and management ecosystems. I'm not going to invent contract specifics because we don't have that here, but the general structure matters. Artists are brands. Brands have managers. Managers have relationships. Relationships influence where songs premiere, who reacts first, what gets framed as statement versus beef, and which narratives get clipped into virality. When Wack jumps on right after the premiere and calls it a statement, he's doing PR in real time. He's steering the interpretation away from Game is scared of Kendrick and toward Game is a leader. That's not random. That's brand defense. And the funniest part? The pick-a-side patrol thinks they're the ones controlling the story, but they're being used for free labor. Their outrage is the marketing budget. Their think pieces are the ad spend. Their he can't do that in Compton takes are the very fuel that makes this record feel dangerous, which makes more people click. Does everybody understand how upside down that is? The gatekeepers become the interns. So when you ask, will Kendrick respond? You're asking the wrong business question. The real question is, who benefits if Kendrick responds, and who benefits if he doesn't? If Kendrick responds, the Game and Drake get even more attention and the ecosystem eats. If Kendrick doesn't respond, the Game gets to say, see, nobody can check me, and Drake still gets to sit there like the hook was enough. Either way, the song did its job. And that brings us to the truth bomb, because when you connect the surface receipts, the cultural reactions, and the system incentives, the real play becomes obvious. Here's the major reveal, and it's why this track feels like a diss even without names. The Game isn't primarily dissing one rapper. He's exposing the entire permission structure the culture has been pretending is real. This is a diss at the concept of approval. It's a diss at the idea that a handful of camps, podcasts, and fan militias get to decide who can stand next to who. That's why the most important line isn't even the flashiest one. It's the combination of pick a side and no breaks. Because pick a side is the culture's demand. No breaks is the refusal. Put together, it becomes, I'm not negotiating with your narrative. And if you want the darker layer, the Drake on the hook choice makes it even more brutal because it weaponizes association. Drake doesn't have to name Kendrick Lamar for Kendrick to feel the temperature rise. Drake doesn't have to diss anybody for the West Coast Border Patrol to start acting like the city is under siege. The hook is like a siren. The feature itself is the bar. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not claiming the Game has some signed document that proves Kendrick is mad today or that Kendrick is definitely going to respond. We don't have that. What we do have is a long-running narrative, reported tension in the past, and a present-day record that intentionally pokes that exact bruise. And the timing, coming when people are already hypersensitive about alliances, makes it feel engineered, not accidental. And that higher-ups told me to shut it up moment, that's the cherry on top, because it hints that people in this ecosystem know how quickly rumors and politics can spill into something bigger, so they clamp down. But the Game drops a record called No Breaks in that same window and basically says, clamp all you want, I'm still moving. That is a direct challenge to the machine. So the consequences aren't just someone might rap back. The consequences are cultural. If the Game can stand next to Drake publicly and keep it pushing, then the West Coast Border Patrol loses moral authority. If they can't stop it, then what else can't they stop? If their outrage doesn't produce a response, then their power is revealed as fabricated. And once power is revealed as fabricated, it starts dying. And for Drake, the consequence is even more interesting, because he gets to re-enter spaces through relationships rather than requests. Not let me in, but I'm already here and your own people put me here. That flips the narrative. That's not just petty, that's devastating, because it reframes him from outsider to unavoidable. Now, let's land this plane the right way, because at the end of the day, the hero of this story isn't the loudest talker. It's the person who can take the heat and still act.
The Game's whole move here is discipline disguised as chaos. People call him messy, but look at the pattern. He's consistent about one thing. He refuses to be little bro. When he gets pressured, he doesn't write a thread. He makes a moment. He did it with the bar choices on this record. He did it by not hiding Drake. And he did it by letting the hook repeat like a stamp. No breaks. That's not an accident. That's him choosing to stand in the fire and daring the culture to admit it can't actually control him. And Drake, love him or hate him, plays his role perfectly too. He doesn't overtalk. He doesn't overexplain. He doesn't do the dramatic, "I'm offended" routine. He shows up, chants the slogan, and lets everyone else argue themselves into exhaustion. That's why his presence on the hook is so poisonous to the pick-a-side patrol, because they can't debunk a hook. They can't fact-check a chant. They can only rage at it. Meanwhile, what do the villains do? The timeline hall monitors do what they always do. They try to turn a relationship into a court case. They try to demand compliance. They try to make a grown man ask for permission to collaborate. And then they act shocked when he responds like a rapper instead of a politician. Here's the contrast one-liner that sums up the whole thing. The hero moves with actions. The villains move with approvals. And if you're watching this thinking, okay, but does this mean Kendrick is scared? No, not at all. Great artists don't have to respond to every provocation, but the cultural scoreboard doesn't care about nuance, and that's the point. The game is exploiting the fact that the internet will treat silence as surrender, even when it isn't. That's why this move is smart. It puts pressure on the narrative, not necessarily on the man. So, where does that leave us? It leaves the game looking like the guy who can still create a moment on command, Drake looking like the guy who can still bend the room without even rapping a verse, and the West Coast Border Patrol looking like what they are, a loud committee with no real badge, just a whistle and a group chat. And yeah, I know some people will hate hearing that, but if you're honest, you can feel the culture shifting away from permission slips. Fans are tired of being told what's allowed. They want the music, they want the tension, they want the spectacle, and they want it without the fake morality play. Now, the future tease, because this is not the end. It's the start of the next phase of the rollout, and the next phase of the politics. The game has an album road in front of him, and if this record is on it, then the rest of that track list becomes a minefield. Every feature is going to be treated like a statement, every line is going to get decoded, and every camp is going to be listening for whether this stays subliminal or turns direct. And on the Drake side, the bigger question is whether this becomes a pattern, hook-only appearances that function like signal flares, showing up in places that make the internet argue, then vanishing before anyone can pin him down. Because if that's the play, you're going to see more of these presents as provocation moments, not just with the game, but with whoever is willing to take the heat for standing next to him. So, keep your eyes on the next public reaction from people adjacent to Kendrick's world, not necessarily Kendrick himself. Watch the affiliates, watch the podcasts, watch who suddenly gets loud and who suddenly gets a higher-ups phone call. That's where the real story always leaks first. And if you want the next video to click right after this, I'm cooking one that breaks down the most ignored part of this whole situation, why the media ecosystem needs a West Coast civil war to sell the next 6 months of content, and how certain platforms quietly manufacture sides so they can cash out on the fallout. Because there's one specific moment buried in these clips that tells you exactly who's steering the conversation, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.